Hey, everybody, thanks for tuning into this episode of Talkin Fire. My name is Dean Babineau, and we are here with a great guest today. We are with Tiger Smittendorf, and we're going to talk about some recruitment and some retention. Hopefully, you've tuned in not just to hear some great things from Tiger, but because you have a need. Most departments have a need. They have a need to either retain their people, maybe get some more people, learn some skills about how to keep the folks that are with us happy and coming back, responding to calls. And I think we're going to solve some of those things for you tonight in our conversation with Tiger, at least especially around the retention part. Him and I have a great relationship, and we're going to talk about how we've come to know each other over the last maybe year or so through some mutual friends. And then, like I said, we're going to talk a lot about how we can keep good people in our fire departments to do good work for our community. Tiger, how are you?
I'm doing great, Dean. Thanks for having me on again.
No, you're very welcome. And again, is important, right? You were in one of our episodes when the National Fire Academy was shut down, and
Right.
that was. It seems like forever ago, but it wasn't. It was a little less than a year ago, and you were on talking about why the National Fire Academy is so important. And at that point in time, you were really just a friend of a friend to me.
Right.
And through that friend and through some effort, you and I are now friends, which is, I think, really one of the great things about the fire service is, how we are in a place and then we get to go different places and we get to meet different people. And for me, it was really through recruitment and retention.
Right.
And, obviously we're going to chat about that in a second, but why don't we get right into it? So most everyone talks about recruitment and retention, and they put the and in there. What do you think of that? Like recruitment and retention, is one more important than the other?
Well, I think that many of us suffer both of those challenges, if you will, or thrive at creating solutions for each of those challenges separately. But the reality is, we can't talk about one without the other. They are so interdependent, so interlaced that they're joined at the hip, and therefore we have to address both simultaneously. And in some cases, we have to address them independently, but simultaneously. So there's challenges associated with that. If you look at all the challenges associated with just retention or just recruitment, it's probably more than one person can handle, and maybe even one team within a firehouse can handle it. Maybe it makes good sense to simply separate the two, but make sure that the efforts of both of those sub teams, if you will, those subsets are closely aligned to address both of those issues at the same time.
So, Tiger, you talked about people responsible for these things, and you talked about teams of people, and maybe dividing them out. And although I spent a number of years as a call firefighter before I became a full-time firefighter, and then I moved on even from that, we didn't have anyone dedicated to either of those roles. But I know a lot of combination departments and volunteer departments that have people in those roles. Is that really a role that every fire department should have somebody doing?
Well, Dean, that I start every conversation, every class, every thing that I talk about by asking a very pointed question. If you're not focused on retention and recruitment, what are you focused on? Right. And then many times I'll backtrack and I'll say, let me reframe that. Let me rephrase that. And I'll shout it at them. Right. And I'll ask them pointedly, if you are not focused on retention or recruitment, what are you focused on? And many chiefs or, presidents, commissioners, firefighters, officers, whoever it may be, will tell me, well, we're focused on trying to get trucks out the door. We're focused on training. We're focused on fundraising. We're focused on whatever. It all comes back to retention and recruitment. Right.
Yeah. Yep. And as you were saying that, like, that's what I was thinking, right? Is that most people are going to say, well, training, responding and training.
Right.
But the reality is, and we're going to talk more about it, but the reality is that training, it builds that camaraderie, not just technical ability,
Right.
but also that team spirit, that esprit de corps that so many people in the fire service long for, that
Yep.
even training is something that helps retain our people.
Absolutely. And the other big factor for training is trust. Right. And trust is the foundation of everything. So, training tells you whether or not you can trust that person with your life on the incident scene. And also, can you trust that person with your back in the firehouse? Right. And those, to me, are two equally important factors. Right. And I create a lot of memes and definitions and stuff. And one of my definitions of brotherhood is brotherhood equals loyalty, loyalty equals trust. If I can't trust you with my back in the firehouse, how should I ever expect that I can trust you with my life on the incident scene? Right. And sometimes one is more inherent, one is easier than the other. Right. But it all comes down to trust, and trust is the foundation of retention. If you don't trust the people around you, either in the firehouse or on the incident scene, it's not likely you're going to be doing it with those folks for too long.
Yeah. So I think the best way for us to go through this little conversation we're going to have about this is maybe talk about like why people show up in the fire department or the fire service, and then maybe why they leave, and then go from there. And what can we do to change that, right? So, in your experiences, why do people show up at the fire service? And it doesn't matter, right? Like I heard I had the pleasure of teaching regularly when I was doing that with a city chief. He was a shift commander, a deputy chief, and he had always been a career firefighter. Very urban area, whatever, was 19, 20 years old, took the exam, and that was that, right? There's no option for him to volunteer as a firefighter where he was.
Okay.
And he would always say the same thing in conversation. He would always say, "Don't forget that I volunteered to take that exam. No one made me take that exam." And he says it with humility. Is that his point? Is that we all have to take that same step to say I want to serve others. And
Right.
he grew up in an area where volunteering to serve was not an option. All the departments around him in probably a 30-mile radius were city, career, civil service departments. So as a young person, that was the path, right? But he always says, when somebody says, "Well, you don't know, you didn't volunteer," he said, "I volunteered that Saturday to take that exam. I
Right.
wanted to be a firefighter. I had the same burning desire as someone who voluntarily does it each and every day. The desire is the same." So why do you think people show up? Like, what are some of the big things you see? One of the big reasons that people show up in the firehouse?
Well, I find the chief's comment interesting because there's a common thought line in the volunteer fire service that said, um, your first act of bravery was volunteering, right? But after that, it is your job. It is your responsibility, right? And at the end of the day, the fire department, especially, but therefore its members, right, by default, have a moral, financial, and service obligation to the community to provide the highest level of affordable service that they're capable of, right? It's just somebody along the path decided that using a volunteer staffing model was the most reliable, the most affordable, and the most successful model at the time. But it didn't remove the obligation, right? So just as that chief volunteered to take that exam, everybody who comes to the volunteer fire service does under their own free will as well.
Right.
Right. They don't come under duress.
Right.
Right.
No one's making you be here.
No, absolutely. So inherently they need to want to be there. Right. And the want is very different for a lot of people. Right. When I talk about retention versus recruitment, people join for personal reasons, right? Unfulfilled needs. Perhaps they were on the receiving end of our services and now it's a pay it forward type situation. There's virtually unlimited motivators, but whether they stay or whether they go are quite often for hyper personal reasons as well, because now they're in it, right?
Right.
And I would argue that the decision to volunteer is easier than the decision to continue to volunteer or not continue to volunteer, right? Because you're vested, you're invested.
Right.
They're vested in you, they're invested in you, right? So it's a different relationship. So that's probably one of the differences between retention and recruitment. Now, people stay or they don't stay in a fire department quite often for many of the same reasons that they joined for, right? So, and I'll give you an example of that. My own personal, it's not necessarily why I joined, but it's what the fire service has given me since. And it's a lot of what keeps me there. And that is, it is always fulfilled unmet goals in my life, right? My first job, my first career was in engineering, and then into sales, and then into marketing and management and stuff like that. And I had a boss for 12 years to the day who would always say to me, he says, I don't understand it. I can't compete for your time, your attention, your energy, and your passion for what you go home and do for free. I'm like, that's your first mistake, right? You can't compete, right? I miscalculate something in my engineering job. Not even a human being, but a piece of equipment is either too hot or too cold, or it's too humid, or it's too dry. I go home and miscalculate something. Somebody lives, or they don't, right? So you literally just can't compare, and you can't compete with it. But the fire service has always afforded me opportunities to use unfulfilled passions, unfulfilled talents in ways that have just simply given me the greatest reward. So that's what keeps me going, right? So as far as why people join, again, it could be that unfulfilled need in their life, fill in a gap. Maybe it's they lack friends, they lack, close, tight relationships. They, they're just thirsting to be around more people. They're looking for fulfillment in general. They're looking to make an impact. I say my big three for recruitment and or retention are give them a sense of value, a feeling of belonging, and opportunities to make an impact on themselves and on others. You fulfill that on the front end, you're going to win at recruiting. You fulfill that on the retention, and on the back end, you're going to win the challenge of retention. You strip away any one of those three, or even worse, all three, and now we have a unmotivated volunteer.
Right, which then creates bigger problems.
Right. And let me rephrase that. We don't have an unmotivated volunteer. We have a demotivated volunteer. Unmotivated is I lack the motivation. Demotivated is you robbed me of it.
Fair. Mm-hmm.
Right? Does that make sense?
Right. You took away what was motivating me to go on.
Exactly.
You took that away, and now here's the consequence of that action.
Right.
I'm someone who's now demotivated.
Yep.
So, and of course, as we talk about this, I was thinking about, and I guess a little kind of a bit of a segue before we come back here, but I was thinking about how you and I really kind of hit it off back in the fall, doing some work for Mission CIT on their RRO, the Recruitment and Retention Officer program.
I'm going to stop you there.
Yep.
It's the retention and
recruitment officer. See, I always default to the easy one, right? So,
right?
Some work we did with that program, and I was fortunate. I was just fortunate by a twist of fate to end up being able to work with you and with them. And by no means is this a plug for them. However, if somebody's looking for high quality retention or recruitment training, it's a great program. You pretty much deliver almost all of it for them. And I may have misspoke there. It might be all of it, but if it's not all of it, it's darn close.
I do, and then I teach with someone else.
Right. Like so, and as we're going through these reasons people come up or reasons people join the fire service, I was just thinking back to that classroom, and you and I could come up with maybe a dozen, but when you now sit with a bunch of fire service professionals and you just keep saying, give me one more, give me one more, give me one more, the reasons people come to the fire service are as vast and plentiful as people themselves. And it's really interesting, right, to sit there. And, and I think that's one of the things that I've been fortunate to be able to do is sit in a lot of rooms too and hear a lot of these conversations. And it's always interesting why people would show up, because it's for some of the reasons that I would never do it, right? Like whatever it might be. I mean, it's just something I hadn't thought of. My family was impacted by fire years ago in a commercial environment, a business my father owned, and, he had to rebuild and all that. And I can still remember the fire. I mean, I was young. I was probably 7 or 8. But that isn't why I became a firefighter. It had very little impact, actually. So, we talk about someone who used the service. It really wasn't even on my mind when I joined the fire service,
Huh.
which is odd.
Yeah.
I joined for other reasons,
Right.
and everybody's got their story. Um, but we started to kind of touch on why people leave. How can we intercede in that early on? So somebody comes to the fire service. Are there things we can do in those first few years that someone joins the fire service to I hate to say to get our hooks in them, but let's face it, how can we make sure that in those first 2 years or so we really get someone hooked?
Well, several ways, and to me, it starts with, and the common phrase, today in every business, every industry, every organization, every setting is find their why, right? What
Mm-hmm.
what brought them there, right? And literally put it on paper, put it in their file, make them write it out. What brought them to the fire service, right?
Yep.
And keep revisiting that as often as is appropriate, right? So one of the things that we touch on heavily in the RRO class, the Retention Recruitment Officer Development class, is turn our focus away from doing exit interviews, right? And towards having what are commonly referred to as stay conversations, right? And stay conversations are, A, do you plan on staying? How long do you plan on staying? How much longer do you plan on continuing to contribute? How much more do you plan on continuing to contribute? Or are you going to need to back away from your contributions while still maintaining basic expectations? But how is the organization doing at fulfilling your why? And has your why changed from the time you walked in the door to where you are now in your fire service journey? Right? Just as mine did, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for many people, and for a lot of people, it's their why of coming into the fire service is the BRTs, right? The big red trucks, the lights and sirens, the
Mm-hmm.
adrenaline rush, the fact that it's a service opportunity like absolutely none other, to a richer, deeper why that they could not envision themselves not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep.
And again, I'm a living example of that. I just completed my 45th year as a interior firefighter in my volunteer fire company in September. Right. I'm at an age where I realize there's a sunset on my physical ability to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm blessed to still be able to physically do it. But I know there's an end cap to that. So I try to focus on, okay, what are the other things I can do in the fire service that provide me similar, certainly nothing equals that level of fulfillment, right? Of the activity, the active part of what we do. But what are other things that we can do, right? And it's quite honestly, it's no different than retiring from virtually any other job or occupation or profession. If it's a lot of what has defined your life for a long time, and suddenly that you go from 60 to 0, how are you going to deal with that?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I've been working now for decades planning for that time, and that transition will be probably easier for me than it is for other people, because fighting fires, the active part of serving is not the only way that I serve.
Right.
Right.
And I want to visit this concept of a stay conversation a little more, because I think that and again, where I am in, I guess, central Massachusetts and central and eastern Massachusetts, there's a lot of either medium-sized combination departments that have virtually almost all career people, and then a handful maybe of some on-call people. There's still a couple of departments close to me right here that are incredible on-call departments that can roll 3 trucks out at 2 p.m. on a weekday, with very little career support, that are amazing. But the vast majority of departments around me are full-time career departments. And what's interesting is that even those departments, people are leaving a department to go to another department. And, for a while it used to just be the new people, in that first year they get off probation and then they hunt a contract, right? And they get better this or they get better that. But I'll tell you, it's not that anymore. It's people that have been on 5 years or 10 years that are looking for either a bigger department because they know as they age, they're going to want different opportunities, maybe opportunities that bigger departments may offer, things like a training division or inspectional services where there's multiple jobs inside of those units. But I wonder if even on the career side, if during that annual performance review, if you're doing them and doing them well, if you do a stay conversation, hey, you've been here a year, you've been here 2 years, I want to talk not just about your performance, but about our performance. How's the organization treating you besides just the paycheck on the career side? But what are we doing for you to keep you energized, to keep you enthused? And what are things that you might want to do that we're not thinking of? I know some progressive chiefs that have phrased that to their people, and now maybe they've got a motor unit with a motorcycle, or they've got some canine support, right? Whatever it is, because they've turned to their people and said, what is it that you're going to get excited about that we can do, that's reasonable. So I think this concept of a stay conversation is really important. And I think it's important in both sides.
Yeah, and the concept behind having a stay conversation is to prevent more exit interviews.
Right.
Or if not prevent, predict.
Yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm. And whether it's a paid combination or volunteer setting, to have that stay conversation, just ask the question, how much longer do you see yourself serving? And they say, if you first ask, how are things going and are you happy here? And, you get positive feedback to that. But then you ask the question, how much longer do you see yourself serving? And suddenly they say, well, probably only for another year. Right? What happened there?
Right. Where's the disc? Is there a disconnect? What's
exactly. Or what's going to happen a year from now that is going to change our relationship? And it may be, hey, I'm going to college. I'm going to get married. My full-time employment is going to move me. Whatever the case may be, if we don't have that stay conversation, it's going to catch us by surprise.
Right. And then we're having the exit interview. And we're learning the things that we might have been able to influence after it's potentially too late.
Right. Absolutely.
And
so
that's unfortunate.
And it's tied to a lot of things, but certainly having stay conversations can reduce or can prevent or at least predict the need for exit interviews, right? Because too often with just exit interviews, if it's relationship based, the relationship is already soured, where quite honestly, you're probably either not going to get good feedback, you may not get any feedback, or you certainly may not get the feedback you're looking for, nor appreciate necessarily the tone in which it's shared, right? Read between the lines, right? So don't wait until the relationship is soured. Let's do a sit rep. Where are we now? Right. And again, I talk about creating memes and phrases and stuff like that. One I created a long time ago was the organization only focuses on whether or not the individuals are meeting the expectations of the organization, but fails to recognize whether the organization is meeting the needs of the individual, quite frankly, is destined for failure or even worse, obsolescence. Right. But what you just described about asking, how are we doing for you? That has been part of the conversation for a long time, right? And it is part of the structural failure of the fire service, because I have this retention cliff theory, right? That people come into the fire service, they get some training, they get some experience, they start taking on responsibility, and just as they're kind of on this upward trajectory, life gets in the way and their level of participation and or their contribution starts to fade, fall, whatever the case may be. Well, when the front end of the pipeline was full, we could simply let them slip off, jump off, or sometimes we'd give them a swift kickoff, that retention cliff, right?
Yep.
We could essentially afford for people to be disposable. But I don't care whether you're career combination or volunteer, how's your pipeline look now?
it is not nearly as full as it used to be.
Exactly, right? In some cases, it's dripping or dry.
Yep.
And it's partly because they waited until or focused on the exit interview instead of having state conversations.
Yeah. Nope. That's
right.
that. Yeah, absolutely. Right. So we found ourselves in this conundrum where people are hitting that cliff called life. They're making decisions, right. And now we have no pipeline, and now it's a problem.
Right.
Now it's a problem for us.
Right. And if I sketch it out sometimes, because again, my engineering background, everything needs a diagram, right? I also use the relationship between Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote to envision, what that cliff looks like, right? You can picture that, and it's probably a lot like that. But you think about it in our fire departments. If you look back 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, what was the attrition rate? Right. In many cases, you'll find that those bodies are stacked like cordwood at the bottom of those retention cliffs, right? And it's a large part of why we're in the situation we're in. And now we're trying to play catch up when the pipeline is certainly not as full as it once was. So again, I talked to chiefs and commissioners in fully paid departments and combination departments and volunteer departments alike, and the number of candidates available to choose from in many of those instances is less and less. So when we talk about recruitment, when we talk about retention, in all of those cases, retention to me and how retention's impact on recruitment comes back to one word, and that's culture. Right? When you talk about call firefighters or fully paid firefighters, green grassing their way to higher employment,
yep.
They're not necessarily taking the time to ingrain themselves and embed themselves in that culture. They're just hopscotching for the next shiny penny.
Right. And that actually that leads me to ask you the question: what do you think is more important, culture or policy? What has a bigger impact on retention? My department's culture or my department's policies?
Absolutely culture.
But we put more time and effort into cultivating our policy, right? Like we put together a policy team. We might have a review. We gotta distribute policy. But when somebody says, "Hey, let's do this because it's going to be good for the culture,"
right?
What do you want to have a pizza party? Well, no. I want to talk to the members about what they think is important,
right,
culturally, that we can do to ensure they're. I don't want to say happy because it's a job. Even if you volunteer, it's still. But what keeps you coming back? Like, why do you want to do this? Not just happy, but why do you want to do this? But instead, we focus a bunch of effort on policy, which is important, but not as important as culture to retention.
Well, and I would argue the better your culture, the less time you have to spend on enforcing policy.
That's a fair statement.
Right?
Absolutely.
Right? Because happy, motivated, energized public servants are more likely to follow the policy that's been provided to them that was hopefully written in a collaborative environment that included them.
Right.
Because that's part of the culture too. Right. And again, I go back to my big three. Give me a sense of value, a feeling of belonging, and opportunities to make an impact on others and myself. Right. Sense of value is you value my opinion, you value my input, you include me in that, and you also don't make the critical error of asking me for my opinion and then ignoring everything I shared with you.
Right.
Right. We talk about that in the RRO class about taking membership temperatures. Right. Do I feel that my voice is being heard? Right. Do I even have a voice in how things are done and run?
Right. And that's important, right? People want a voice.
Right. And I counter that with where the rubber meets the road, and when it comes down to it, not everything can be done by committee.
Right.
A friend of mine for a long time exposed me to the phrase that I've used ever since. And A committee is a cul-de-sac down which great ideas are lured and strangled. A committee is a cul-de-sac down which great ideas are lured and strangled.
Isn't that the truth? I haven't
Right.
heard that one
So
before, and that's
I'm sure
yeah.
everybody listening has served on a committee that hit home with them.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That
There's definitely more than once that I can see that where the good idea has come in,
yeah,
and it gets lured into that committee, and it just gets beaten.
never to be seen again.
Yep,
Right.
yep.
Right.
For whatever reason, and
Right.
and and
Right.
well-intended people strangle that good idea.
Right.
And if you
Exactly.
ask them, they might not even know they did it. Right? They don't
Right.
remember. They don't
Right.
because it wasn't intentional. But boy, oh boy, we do that the second we set up a committee.
Yeah.
Um,
And admittedly, I'm keenly aware of my personality type. I know what my drivers are. I know a number of my blind spots, although I discover new ones every day. Um, but I know I work independently better than I do with committees. I prefer work groups. I know that I don't have a lot of patience for slow moving organizations.
mhm.
So I have to kind of work within that framework and make that work within our system, either in my department and, the various other settings that I get to, both be a follower and be a leader in those situations. So, but again, it's finding people's why, right? And understanding what drives them and make sure that we continue to drive it. Another one of my phrases is the key to retention is recruiting your existing members over and over again every single day,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. Yep. I
Figuring
mean,
out and reminding them and us what brought them here and what keeps them here and what's going to drive them to be even better than they already are.
right. Yeah.
Right. So the key to retention is recruiting your existing members over and over again every single day.
So let's think a little bit about the company officer and that first line supervisor.
Right.
You know what impact do you think they have? If you're a lieutenant, listen to this, or you're a captain, you're responsible for small group leadership, maybe 4 or 5 people like that.
Mhm.
Career volunteer doesn't matter. And what impact do you think that person has, or that person has on retention?
Well, I think the opportunity to have tremendous impact, both frankly good or bad, right? Depending on how you were trained, how you were educated, what you experienced, right? How you were mentored, right? I've long said, especially in the volunteer fire service, but it translates across all types of departments. To me, the best position in the firehouse is the captain, right? You still get to ride the rig, you get to ride the seat whenever you want. Um, you still have an impact on final outcomes,
Hmm.
operational performance. You have a huge impact on training and mentorship. And you don't have what I refer to as the emotional overhead of the officers above you, those assistant chiefs, deputy chiefs, and the person in the seat.
Yep.
Right. And I would argue until you're actually in the seat, meaning the fire chiefs, doesn't matter how close, what level of proximity, there's nothing like being in the seat. Right. So, but that captain just has, runs the firehouse, runs the apparatus bay, has tremendous influence and impact, but still is once removed from all that other stuff that, quite honestly, can just bog people down and also take them away from really what provides them with job satisfaction.
Right.
Right? Everybody thinks they want to be a chief. Everybody thinks they want to be the chief until quite often they're a chief or they are the chief.
Yeah. Every chief I know says the same thing:
Yeah.
is that even as ready as they were and prepared, and the conversations they had with everybody, including other chiefs, they
Right.
had no idea what the job really was all about until they were there. Period. And that's not a shot at any of them. They all say it. And they all say,
Yep.
no matter how much I knew or how prepared I was, until I got here, I didn't understand, that emotional overhead that goes along with that
Right.
position.
Right.
So, So speaking of that, you
Mhm.
know, what do you think that, some of that, thinking about leaders, captains and above, right? The
Mhm.
leaders in the fire service, what are some of their behaviors that they might be blind to that are hurting retention? So things that those officers maybe are doing that they don't even know they're doing,
Mhm.
that are causing people to get to that cliff quicker and to
Right.
step off of it, right? Are there a couple of things through your vast experience that you've caught on to that officers should be kind of like hyper aware of? Oh, I didn't think that had an impact that way.
Right. Right. I think the one of the simplest traps to fall into is when you remove yourself from the firehouse, right? The apparatus bay in a volunteer house, and you go into an office environment, is that separation, that segregation, if you will, that disconnect that is can easily be formulated, right? And I share in all my conversations, my classes. Um, Dr. Harry Carter, one of my mentors, God rest his soul, in 1998 wrote a article for Firehouse Magazine that hung in my fire academy office for 20 years, titled "Are You a Good Follower?" Right, and he makes the case that just as the boss, the chief, has a job to do, so do the firefighters. Right, and one of the visual examples I use of this is an image of um, fire officers in white shirts washing a piece of apparatus, right? And everybody jumps to that and says, now that's real leadership. That's never forgetting where you came from. That's never asking somebody else to do what anything you want to do. That's leading from the front, so on and so forth. But as I argue, if you flip the image over, and the reason the officers in the white shirts are washing that apparatus is because somebody who wears a blue shirt didn't or won't, that's a leadership issue. It's also a followership issue,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in this article, and I've used it ever since, Harry Carter makes the case that before you could ever dream of being a leader, let alone a good leader, you need to first learn how to be a good follower, right? So a common pitfall of somebody who wears a white shirt is to create that physical and also the emotional disconnect between them and the floor, right? The rank and file,
Yep.
whatever you call it, the crew, the people in the firehouse. And I experienced that myself when I was a first assistant chief, and my best friend Bruce Green was the chief of the department. I took on the role of all the administration, all of the paperwork, all of the things that needed to be done, the projects, the project management, and so forth, in an effort to be the best assistant chief he could ever hope to have, which afforded him the time to sit on the tailboard and have the conversations with the firefighters after a call, during training, actively participate.
Mm-hmm.
But it created a disconnect for me.
Right.
And I didn't realize it until it had already happened. So when it was my time to then step into the chief role, I didn't have that same strong bond that he got to enjoy for his tenure as the chief, because frankly, I was carrying the load, and he knows this. We've had this
Mm-hmm.
conversation, right? And uh, it separated me from where I had come from and where I had been. Now, is that my fault? Absolutely, because I take responsibility. But could we have systems in place, programs in place, or simply a culture that supports making sure that we're staying connected, right?
Right.
And you counter that, and I know I'm dragging here, but you counter that with the separation you need to have when you go from buddy to boss,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it still doesn't mean that you can't be connected at the
And,
appropriate levels.
and right, and that's in everything, right? Is that everything is so two sided, like a coin? Is that one can argue, well, you have to do this or you have to do this, and in reality, the world should be full of ands,
Right.
and not ors, right? Like and is a connecting word, and that's really what we need to
That's a
do. Is
great
we
way
need
to
to be
think of it.
connected, right? Is that
Yeah.
Is that you can have that buddy to boss mentality where I'm not your friend here anymore. I'm your supervisor.
Right.
But you can also and be someone who is connected to the people that you work with and understand what's going on in their world day to day. It's not or. These things aren't or. Um,
Right.
and I think that's as leaders, that's one of the things people have to be on guard against is these or decisions. You can be firm and kind.
Right.
They're not ors. So
You can
thinking
be direct and compassionate.
right, right. It's ands,
Yeah.
and if you don't know how to do that, the good news is it's like anything else. You can practice it and you can learn about it, and you say, how do I become and? How do I
Hmm.
how do I have a difficult conversation but I make it understanding?
Right.
And or how do I tell someone that they're not performing well but that I still appreciate them? I just
Right.
would like them to work a different way. And we can practice that stuff. Um, so we've talked a lot about retention, and we're going to keep talking a little bit about it. But what do you see as some of the big? Well, let me ask you this: are there generational differences when it comes to recruiting? Because especially in the and I was going to say in the volunteer arena, but I think this is out. I know a
Mhm.
lot of second career people that are coming in the fire service in career positions in
Right.
their very late 30s and early and late 40s and
Right.
beyond, that have had successful runs in other things. Maybe been
Yeah.
on a call department for a while or a volunteer for a while, and an opportunity is presented, and now they're ready for it. Or now
Right.
they're meaning their life is ready, not physically. I mean, they're ready
Right.
for it, but that their
Right.
life is ready for it. So, um, do you think there's generational differences in the way we retain rather those folks?
Well, on one side of it, I'd say absolutely not. You know, uh, we're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Been around for what, a century,
Yep.
right? Has been modified how many times?
Right. Right. Exactly.
Zero,
Yep.
right? And in my classes I actually had two foundational layers to it that have been added since, and that's Wi-Fi and battery life. Right, I think those are updates to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and they come first before even security and all that other
Yep.
stuff.
Oh yeah.
Right? So,
It's true. If they don't have battery life and Wi-Fi,
right, exactly. We don't have a need for all those other
yeah.
hierarchy of needs, right?
There are
Yeah,
days
we
I
don't
think I'd
exist.
give up food for battery life and Wi-Fi.
That's right. Yeah. Right. Um, so if you look at foundationally, no, but in reality, yes, and in applicability, absolutely, right. And some of the people you just referred to, where it's second career late bloomers, is what I refer to them. Whether they start volunteering later in life or they actually make a career change. Um, it's again identifying their why and speaking to it and showing how the fire service can fulfill that, right? I do short 30-second video clips for my volunteer fire company, just conjured ideas that I have, and just using B-roll of apparatus rolling out, flashing lights and stuff like that. It asks a question: drive a desk by day, drive a fire engine at night,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So maybe it's the person who works in an office, they're, in a management supervisory position, whatever. Again, that's just recognizing that they have unfulfilled needs, right? That we provide a level of excitement, quite frankly, not as often as maybe we portray it to be.
Yep.
Right? It's not all Chicago Fire, it's not all 911, it's
Mm-hmm.
not, all that stuff, but occasionally, we do have the opportunity to elevate both our heart rate and our adrenaline, right? So those opportunities present themselves. So it's figuring that out, and so is that generational? Not necessarily, right? Maybe it's not driving a desk by day. Maybe it's the underemployed, right, where they're stuck in a job versus a career.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're stuck in a career,
Yep.
not even a job, right? but it pays the bills,
Yep.
and it pays them handsomely, right? And it's tough to walk away from that, but they still lack fulfillment. Right. So it's identifying that, it's getting to that core, and it's speaking to those people. And a lot of people argue that we shouldn't be selling the sizzle that, quite frankly, doesn't exist or rarely exists,
Mm-hmm.
and we should be selling more of the steak, right? The realities of what we do. And I don't disagree with that, but sizzle is what sells steak. Ask anybody who owns a restaurant,
Right.
right?
Yep.
So so it's framing that conversation, but then the stake of it is still foundational to what? The opportunity to make an impact on others and themselves.
Yep.
Right. So it's my big three. It's a sense of value.
Yep.
What I'm being valued by the organization and the people I serve with and the people I serve. I have a sense of belonging. It feels like family. It feels like something that I either had and now miss. Maybe I came from a big family, or I never had. I was an only child, or I just never had that in any other professional or personal setting. And then layer that with, hey, I want to make an impact on myself and others. So, how do we speak to each of those three using different messaging, using different imagery, and using different techniques and different platforms and media?
Right. And I would think what a great way maybe to engage. And I don't want to say some of your younger members, because I think that technology is such that so many people are using technology now in diverse ways across the entire spectrum of age and generation. So this misnomer that, like, oh, if your younger folks can do the TikTok things for you, yeah,
Right.
really, that the engagement in those platforms can come at any point by anybody,
Right.
as long as they know what they're doing and they can learn. So really, you might even be able to retain somebody by having a stay conversation. And in that stay conversation, they say, one of the things I really like about my maybe full-time job, or my other thing, is that I do all of our social media work, or I do some of our social media work. And I'd love to do some of that here on the fire department. And you go,
Right.
this is great. What would you like to do? Well, I think if we do these 30-second clips with the fire truck in the background and
Right.
just a quick phrase, and whatever it is, like you said, drive a desk by day, fire truck by night, things like that,
Right.
just to heighten people's interest,
Yeah.
and that's really on the recruitment side, but
Mhm.
but at the same time, it can be on the retention side, because you'll need people to do those little videos,
Right.
as long as you don't send them down that cul-de-sac of the committee.
That's
But
right.
for the most part, right, is that
Yeah.
you can do that, and
Yeah.
and actually, it's funny. You segued right in the next thing I wanted to ask you about, and that's growth and purpose, right? Like, how important is growth and purpose compared to, and in your case, you call it impact on self and others, right?
Yeah.
How important is that versus things like pay and schedule and other benefits in your experience?
Well, and there's a growing trend, even in New York State. They're pushing to incentivize volunteers, right?
Mhm.
Financially, stipends, you know, um, fuel reimbursements, whatever the case may
Yep.
be, right? So, and it's kind of interesting because I have unlimited number of people who come to me and ask me, well, what's a good incentive for a volunteer? And my tort response is always this: what are you asking me for? Ask your volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
And when you ask them what incentive could we create that would allow you to serve longer, to contribute more, to contribute in other ways, turn out more, participate more, whatever the case may be. And my guess is most of them will tell you it has nothing to do with any of that.
Right.
There's nothing you could do that changes that in terms of a financial or remuneration type
Mm-hmm.
incentive, right? Um, it all comes back to how do you make me feel, which all comes back to culture. Okay. And unfortunately, I feel strongly that whole incentive conversation is a slippery slope, right? Because once that is the carrot, and I see it in a lot of, for example, safer grant funded programs where they create incentives for volunteers to turn out more. They see tremendous spikes in participation.
Mm-hmm.
The grant goes away, the incentive goes away, the participation follows.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's a one and done, right? Um, it's the other side of that equation that I say is make sure you're targeting the right audiences with your incentive programs, right? I don't need another blue T-shirt or hat, a job shirt, whatever. By the way, I wear a size large in all of those in case anybody cares to donate. But what I say is what my greatest incentive is every time my pager goes off, it offers me an opportunity to go and do what I love, which is a direct disincentive to the people who love me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because this doesn't bring me closer to them. It does what? Takes me further away for
Yep.
longer periods of time, right? So when you consider your incentive programs, if a gas card would ease my financial burden of volunteering and my support system recognizes that, maybe that eases my burden at home.
Right.
Right? 20 plus years ago, I created the phrase peace at home equals peace at the firehouse.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You help create a happier home life for me. It's easier for me to serve at the firehouse. So, and I tell this story often. Again, my best friend Bruce Green, we were chiefs together. One of the greatest things he ever did was sent a U.S. mailed a handwritten thank you note to Lori, my wife, thanking her for the sacrifices she made, which have led to the contributions I made to our fire department. And while I, like many others in the fire service, are hoarders of fire service keepsakes and memorabilia, she is not of anything, but I know that she still has that thank you card, right?
Yep.
Then I half joke that singular act of his to handwrite a thank you note to her kept me out of the doghouse for like well over 2 weeks before I did something else, right?
Uh,
So when we look at incentives and what motivates people, really ask them what motivates them, right? Is it the next shiny penny or is it something more foundational, more inherent? Create more opportunities for me to serve in the ways that I want to serve. Give me more flexibility in how I serve. Do I really need to be at every meeting or can I be there virtually where it allows me to stay home and be within arm's reach to take care of my family, but I can still stay engaged? But if something pops off that I need to address or attend to, I have that flexibility, right? Are there other ways to offer me flexibility? Simply, my department is home response, 100% home response, and we're running, nearly 1,000 runs a year. That doesn't necessarily work for everybody.
right.
Right. Because invariably, when I'm available, there are no calls. And when I'm not available,
Yep.
this thing is popping off all the time.
Oh yeah.
Right. Never fails. So is a duty crew program an opportunity? Right. And I think there's thresholds associated with that in terms of call volume and or activities and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
And there's some mechanics that have to be figured out. But again, it's another opportunity for people to serve.
So really, I guess as we kind of start to wrap up here, retention is really about making sure we're doing what we can to support the member, to support their desire to serve others, and whether that's in a call or combination volunteer full time doesn't matter, right?
Right.
Is that the leadership of the organization has to make sure they're doing everything possible to support the members. And when I say possible, I mean obviously possible, reasonable. I mean, but to support the members so the members continue to serve.
Right.
And in that service, hopefully they find their calling, their passion, their reason, their why,
Their fulfillment.
their fulfillment, and there we have it. Right, we've got kind of a full circle.
Yeah.
So, I guess if you had to say, if I was a chief or an officer, or I'm listening to this, and tomorrow morning I'm going to get up and I'm going to write down like the three things, or I'm listening right now and I said the three things I kind of have to do related to retention that can make an impact. But I only got time for three right now, or I've got to go sell it to the board, or I've got to sell it to my commissioners or whatever, and I can't go in with 10 things. I can go in with three.
Right.
And I want to have a big impact. And I know we don't know the culture, we don't know but what are kind of those three broad brush things that somebody could do tomorrow in their organization to make a difference on their retention?
Well, I'm going to go back to my three foundations, right?
Yep.
Give them a sense of value, feeling and belonging, and the opportunities to make an impact. What that looks like in your environment may vary greatly from what it looks like in my environment. But you just hit on something that is spot on, and that is, you ever seen the internet meme that says CEO asked the CFO, what if we invest in our people and they leave? And the CFO counters with, what if we don't invest in our people and they stay?
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So
it's true.
Let's be careful what you wish for.
Right.
Which that is, that entire conversation comes back to culture, right? And it really comes back to something I share, and I share a class titled "Creating Leaders at Every Level Starts with You." And one of the opening slides says, "Leadership takes gas. You need to give a shit."
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Because if you don't give a crap about people, you have no business being in a position of leadership. And I'll just share, my frame of that conversation is there are no such thing as bad leaders. Either you're a leader or you're not. There's bad supervisors, there's lousy managers, and there's horrible bosses. We know that because they made 2 movies about it, right? But I don't even credit them. I don't even honor them with the title leader. If you don't care about your people, I mean, it's all these cliches just keep colliding together. That nobody cares how much you know until they know you care.
Mm-hmm.
What else do you need after that?
Right.
Whatever form that comes in, whatever framework or culture that foundational statement creates, is going to be defined by the people in that culture, both at the top, the bottom, the middle, and also by those who aren't part of it yet, and those who were foundational in creating what is present today.
So true. If people are looking for you, they can find you. They can find you on the internet, right? Tiger Smittendorf. You're kind of, I don't want to say you're on all the platforms. I don't want to say like you're everywhere, but you're on all the platforms.
Yeah, I tell folks I am in the absolute worst witness protection program ever.
And I mean, with a name like Tiger, you can't get missed often. I mean,
No.
so there you go, right? So people can find you.
Yeah.
They should follow you because you have mentioned, quotes and memes and just content in general. And I know that too because I've followed you for a while. So obviously that's all good stuff. People can send you an ice cream. They can get your address and send you an ice cream because I know you're an ice cream aficionado.
Venmo me ice cream money.
There you go, right?
Yeah.
Is there anything, parting words besides your big three, the sense of value, feeling of belonging, and impact on self and others? Is there anything besides that as we wrap up you want to share with the folks that are tuned in to hear from you and about retention?
I'm going to end with the statement I started with. If you're not focused on retention and recruitment, what are you focused on? Nothing else matters. We can have the newest most modern fire stations, the top of the line apparatus, and state of the art equipment, what I refer to commonly as the widgets of the fire service, that are 100% useless without the proper quantity and quality of people to make it all work. Everything comes back to retention and recruitment comes back to effective retention, and retention comes back to effective leadership, and you need to give a shit.
Absolutely. Tiger, thank you for the great conversation. It's been a great time. And like I said, hopefully, folks at least tune into you on social media and hear the great things you have to offer, and track you down for one of your RRO, the Retention and Recruitment Officer classes, and get involved. I thank you for your time. If you're just tuning in, you'll tune back in, because our guest tonight has been Tiger Smittendorf, a friend of mine and a friend of the fire service, and an expert in so many things, especially retention and recruitment. Our executive producer is Mac Rice. My name is Dean Babineau, and I hope you'll join us next time when we will be talking fire.